For years, Doug Ford played a cautious political hand. The Ontario Premier, known for his populist rhetoric and business-friendly agenda, rarely strayed into direct confrontation with President Donald Trump, even during some of the most turbulent moments in the US-Canada trade relationship. From 2018 to 2022, while Trump volleyed tariffs and threats across the northern border, Ford stayed largely silent. But that chapter has now come to a definitive close. In a striking departure from his previous posture, Ford has abandoned diplomatic restraint, with Trump once again ramping up economic pressure, this time threatening a sweeping 35% tariff on Canadian goods by August 1st. Ford is no longer hedging his bets. "I can't trust President Trump," he stated bluntly, voicing the kind of skepticism rarely heard from Canadian premiers about an American president. His support, instead, has shifted firmly toward Prime Minister Mark Carney and a coordinated Canadian strategy to push back. Ford's evolution reflects more than a personal change of heart. It signals a broader pivot among Canadian leaders who, after years of hoping for stability in the cross-border trade relationship, now believe the volatility is not a temporary feature, but a defining reality. At the center of Canada's response is a powerful, if simple, reminder to American audiences: Canada is the #1 buyer of US goods. "We buy more products from the US than Japan, China, Korea, the UK and France combined," Ford said, citing the 2024 trade data. It's a staggering contrast. Canada imported $359 billion in American goods last year, dwarfing Japan's $79 billion. The message is tailored for the American heartland, a direct appeal to voters and business owners whose livelihoods depend on Canadian demand. But the Trump administration isn't looking backward. Its trade calculus has shifted from recognizing historical loyalty to demanding future concessions. The deals signed with Japan, the UK, and the European Union weren't about who bought the most in the past, they were driven by promises to purchase more in the future. In that context, Canada's market size, however impressive, offers limited leverage. What matters to Trump is trade balance, and in his eyes, Canada still owes. The latest flashpoint is softwood lumber. Long a source of friction, the dispute has reignited with ferocity. In July, the U.S. Commerce Department announced a steep increase in anti-dumping duties on Canadian lumber, from 7.66% to 20.56%. The blow is being felt hardest in provinces like New Brunswick and British Columbia, where forestry remains a cornerstone industry. In New Brunswick alone, more than 28,000 workers are directly employed in the sector. The tactic is familiar. Trump isn't aiming for a broad-based deal. He's playing a segmented game, targeting specific industries with tariffs to divide and pressure Canada's internal political alignment. Aluminum, steel, autos, and now lumber, the administration's strategy is to apply economic pain one industry at a time. But instead of fragmenting the Canadian response, this approach may be doing the opposite. Facing a piecemeal assault, Canadian premiers are moving toward unity. In recent weeks, they've huddled with Carney in closed-door strategy sessions, seeking to harmonize their positions and present a collective front. It's a notable shift from earlier phases of the trade conflict, when provinces often pursued separate paths, occasionally cutting side deals with Washington. This time, the strategy is cohesion. And the rationale runs deeper than just politics, it's structural. Canada isn't just a customer of the United States, it is a core component of the American supply chain. From electricity grids to semiconductor inputs, from automotive manufacturing to critical minerals, Canadian provinces help power the U.S. economy. That reality doesn't fit neatly into the Trump administration's transactional model, which often prioritizes immediate wins over systemic value. But Canadian leaders see it as the country's greatest strength. Rather than begging for relief or racing to accept any deal, Canada is choosing to preserve its strategic importance, even if it means absorbing short-term pain. Carney and Ford are making a long-term bet. In February 2026, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, is scheduled for its mandatory review, a high-stakes process that could redefine the entire framework of North American trade. That's the arena Canada is preparing for, and entering it prematurely, under unfavorable terms, could fatally compromise its negotiating hand. So while Trump escalates pressure with deadline-driven ultimatums, Canada is leaning into restraint. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a signal. The Trudeau-era strategy of patient diplomacy is being adapted, not abandoned. Carney, a former central banker with a reputation for steady leadership, is framing this pause as purposeful. He is preparing not just to survive this latest tariff storm, but to position Canada for leverage in the 2026 review, when structural reforms, long-term guarantees, and deeper integration could be on the table. Trump's August 1st deadline may come and go without a deal, and as the clock ticks down, Washington seems increasingly resigned to that outcome. For the US, tariffs are becoming the default mechanism of engagement. For Canada, restraint is now resistance. The trade relationship between these two nations has weathered many storms, but this one feels different, not just in intensity, but in intent. The United States appears less interested in partnership and more interested in control. And Canada, for the first time in a long time, is willing to walk away from the negotiating table to protect its long game. As the August 1st deadline looms, the diplomatic temperature between Washington and Ottawa has plunged. Trump's recent remarks, delivered casually before boarding Air Force One en route to Scotland, revealed what many in Ottawa had suspected but hoped not to hear aloud. The United States may no longer be seriously interested in reaching a trade agreement with Canada. The message was as direct as it was dismissive. Trump stated that the U.S. hasn't really focused on Canada and doesn't expect a deal. In response, Prime Minister Mark Carney has made Canada's position unequivocal. The government will not sign a bad deal under duress. This resolve is shared across provincial lines, with premiers and trade officials echoing a unified message: short-term appeasement won't secure long-term stability. The paradox lies in the fact that the USMCA, known in Canada as CUSMA, is still legally in effect. Under its terms, more than 90% of Canadian exports to the United States are supposed to be tariff-free, assuming they comply with origin rules. But reality has deviated from the agreement's spirit. Section 232 tariffs, initially justified on national security grounds, remain in place on key Canadian exports like steel, aluminum, copper, and auto parts. Some of these duties reach 50%, undermining the very premise of a free trade pact. Behind the scenes, Canadian businesses are already reacting. According to a July 2025 report from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, nearly 30% of exporters have begun pivoting away from the U.S. market. Another 37% of firms report they are now sourcing materials and components from countries outside the United States. This isn't a symbolic gesture, it's a re-engineering of trade architecture. After decades of interdependence, Canadian firms are actively reducing exposure to U.S. market risks. As Canada diversifies its trade routes, looking toward the European Union, Asia-Pacific, and Latin America, the United States stands to lose more than a reliable customer. It could lose a trusted partner. Carney's refusal to cave before August 1st is rooted in more than just trade figures. His eyes are fixed on February 2026, when the USMCA is scheduled for its 6-year review. Sources close to the Prime Minister's office suggest that Canada is preparing a comprehensive economic and security strategy for that review. It's an ambitious plan that may weave in elements far beyond traditional trade. Defense cooperation, Arctic sovereignty, clean energy partnerships, and critical mineral access could all become part of Canada's bargaining platform. In essence, Carney wants to elevate the conversation from transactional disputes to strategic alignment. As the clock ticks toward August 1st, the lines are drawn. The United States is preparing to tax Canadian goods at historic levels. Canada is preparing to stand its ground. Both sides claim to be defending their national interest, but only one appears to be planning beyond the headlines. In the end, this may not be a story about trade at all. It may be a story about trust, and whether it can survive a presidency built on disruption. Because if Canada no longer trusts the rules that once governed North American commerce, then the damage is already done. The tariffs may come, the deals may falter, but the credibility of the system itself, that may be what gets taxed most of all.